Hello, welcome to another episode of DJ Project Breaks Bad. On here I talk about Season 4. As I said in the last episode, last weekend I did two seasons back to back, which was kind of spontaneous, but at the same time I think it was sort of inevitable with how intense the episodes get and as the seasons get. So Friday I saw Season 3, last Friday I saw Season 3, and last Saturday I saw Season 4. And in a way, I'm glad that I saw both of them back to back because I do sort of see the two seasons working together, even though they weren't necessarily intentionally designed to work together in this way. But they do sort of provide a kind of apex. And I think both of them together form the Godfather Part 2 of Breaking Bad, where this is the moment where, and particularly more in Michael's story. Obviously, there's no well, actually, there are some flashbacks to some of the characters. You can kind of get a sense of where they were and why they do what they do. But you definitely get the feeling that this is Walter about to destroy his enemies. And in fact, I think it was Vince Gillian who said described Season 4 as a 13-episode chess match between Walter and Gus. As I said before, I don't want to do a whole lot of recap of the season, but I want to be able to be free to talk about anything and everything with the show, so once again, assume spoilers. We start off Season 4 with what we left off with Season 3, which was Jesse killing Gale, who was originally Walt's lab assistant with his new meth lab provided by Gus. The idea being that Gale was going to eventually replace, was going to continue cooking meth in Walter's place, and then therefore Walter White has no longer any use for Gus, and therefore he can be expendable. So this was killing for the sake of survival. And then it starts a whole string of back and forth between Walter and Gus. And eventually it all culminates in the end with Walter able to do what I said earlier. He is able to destroy his enemies, and Gus in particular. And boy, oh boy, was that ever an ending. So it's kind of easy to see why I would consider this the Godfather Part 2 of Breaking Bad. Continuing on an idea that I said earlier about that this show was not just about Walter, and I think this really comes through, especially in the fourth season. You get the sense that different characters, and certainly the main, the characters that are the closest to Walter, I would say Jesse and Gus, even though he's his principal antagonist, but still close. And after all, aren't you supposed to keep your enemies closer? And yes, they do make, and actually it is funny that I'm talking about Godfather Part 2 because yes, I do catch all the references that are made to that the characters in universe make to Godfather, and I think all three films have been referenced, including Part 3, which is the one quote that everybody seems to like from Part 3. As soon as I step out, they pull me back in, and I know I said it wrong. But anyways, so yeah, Jesse, Gus, and then of course Skylar, Walter's wife, and then Walt Jr., formerly known as Flynn, his son, and Hank to a certain extent, which is sort of could be considered a secondary antagonist because he's supposed to be the guy that is supposed to get Heisenberg, and so he's kind of chasing Walt, and of course also Walt sees that Hank is a direct threat to his operations, as a DEA agent, even when he's taken off duty. he still presents a formidable threat. But anyways, but the point is that these characters are at different levels, and sometimes what I found is that sometimes they are, if you compare the characters to Walter, they are at points that Walter seemed to have gone before. I mean, for instance, I would say that Jesse is at a level compared to Walt that would put him as sort of equivalent around season 2, maybe the beginning of season 3, where Jesse, where it starts, where when you first meet Jesse in the very beginning, he's sort of a kind of a, I don't want to say arrogant, but there's a sort of a youthful arrogance to him. He's very, very cocky, I should say. But then going through Walter, there's the beginnings of a discipline, and in fact, he even takes on some of Walter's thinking and applies it into his own operations. Trying to maintain a discipline, trying to maintain a composure without losing what makes Jesse Jesse. And by the time you get to season 4, you definitely get to a point where Jesse seems to be more in control and more proactive, rather than having things dictating his actions. He's being more proactive, and he's being more assertive. Much like how Walter had to be. Walter in the beginning was more reactive, but then he got to a point where he had to be more proactive and take the initiative in order to get things done. And then so that'll be like Jesse's arc. And then Gus, and going back to Walter a little bit, Walter will eventually get to the point where Gus is, and so that's sort of his next level. He has to kind of get up to Gus's level, not just for his own survival, because his life is in danger by Gus, but also I think he needed to be at that level where, with Gus's connections and capabilities and his network, to be able to rake in more cash and to be more secure in what he does, and all for the sake of providing for his family. Which then leads to his family with Skylar. Skylar, since now she knows full well what Walter does, she takes it upon herself to be sort of the another guardian of that secret, and her job is to make sure things are in order. And actually, one of the things she does say to him is she's protecting the guy who's supposed to protect the family, which then makes me think of a Simpsons quote when Homer decides to start a neighborhood watch group, which turns into a neighborhood vigilante group. And Lisa asks the rhetorical question, if you're supposed to be the police, who will police the police? And then Homer says, I don't know, the Coast Guard? So, but anyways, but what Skylar is, the responsibilities that she had volunteered. Of course, she would also say that this was not something of her choice. This is not something that she chose to do. I'll get to her a bit more later. But with the things that she takes on, she's sort of at a beginning point with Walter, where she has to learn how to do certain things and not be so, or learning how to be appropriately cautious and not be I don't know what you call it. I'm losing my ability to speak. I also just came home from a long day at work, so I'm really surprised that I've gotten this far and sounded semi coherent and cohesive. But anyways, but she has to learn, not to draw too much attention to herself, to be as cool and calm, and not be so tense, like, oh my God, I'm doing something illegal. Just not bask in that a bit. So really, you kind of get the sense that everybody's on different levels of where they progress. But of course, this is assuming that if everybody's progressing the same thing. I don't think Skylar's has the intent of becoming the next meth kingpin. She just wants to be a good mother and also a kind of provider for the family, in addition to Walter being the caretaker and provider of the family. But it is interesting to kind of see how, or if you want to put it another way, it kind of reminds me of a role-playing game where I don't play. I know too many people who play RPGs. I don't play them myself, but I understand the concept of unlocking achievements, and that as you go through the story and as you make decisions, you're able to attain a certain skill set, a certain power, whatever it is. And I kind of feel the characters do that in their own way as well, as they start to make choices, and those begin to build on themselves. They're able to do a bit more than they were previously. And I think that's something that I didn't get really a chance to talk about with Walter. I mean, as much as Walter is glamorized as being the guy who's on top and the guy who's cool and has it together, pretty much throughout the whole, he's also somebody who's figuring this out. I mean, and again, he was at a position where, I mean, again, he started off as a high school chemistry teacher, and even before that, he was known as a very prominent and respected chemist. And then suddenly he finds himself cooking methamphetamines and being involved in drug economics in Albuquerque, and even though he doesn't himself cross the border, the stuff he does affect what is across the border. There's a little bit of that too. So there's a lot of, so in other words, he does demonstrate an intelligence, and he does demonstrate a foresight, but it doesn't make him immune to making mistakes. He does make mistakes, and he does do things out of ignorance, just out of ignorance. You do find out that he does do some things out of selfish desires, or there's a little bit of a malevolence. There we go. Yeah, I'm tired. But anyways, so in other words, Walter is not as, I don't think he's as cool and insightful as I mean, it makes him a very human character, and that I think that's what makes him really interesting, and why people responded to him so enthusiastically during the show's run. So, I guess my final big thing I want to say. Now, I've been kind of singing its praises, and all the praises are well deserved. But if I were to say that there's one thing that kind of bothers me, and it's Skylar. Now, does this mean that it's a lesser show? Absolutely not. And in fact, I kind of understand, I kind of understand why she is the way she is, and why she comes off the way she does. But if I wanted to make some kind of reservation, or just something that kind of holds me back a little bit, and I don't mean like it holds me back from fully appreciating this show. This is just something that I've noticed. Something that stuck out to me, and it's Skylar's character. And I think what I'm trying to wrap my head around is, and this becomes more apparent starting in the third season, going into the fourth, is that she's trying to play this combination of, again, to use Godfather comparisons, she's combining Kay Adams Corleone with Connie Corleone. The combination of someone who's very innocent and has a strong sense of right and wrong, and absolutely abhors what Walter has become, the Kay Adams comparison, and then the other side where she starts taking matters into her own hands, and she starts initiating things and getting things done, and making sure that the ship runs smoothly, which is like Connie Corleone more in part 3. I know in part 1 and part 2 is there's a different Connie there, but just someone who just sort of just sort of gets things done. And the two don't quite fit together in my view. And I think this especially comes through whenever she interacts with Walter. In the beginning of season 3, when she's finally told by Walter what he does, or that was a combination of him telling him and also her inferring what he does. There's this outright rejection, and she doesn't ever want to speak to him ever again, and she's even willing to, she's changed a lot. She makes it absolutely clear she wants to divorce, and she just, she's very, very insistent that he gets completely out of her life. And then he kind of persuades her, otherwise, or she also says that maybe it's a little bit too extreme, and then she starts getting in on some things, and then starts kind of accepting him. And then there's a sort of push and pull thing, which, again, I think is a very human trait, because people waffle, and especially when you're dealing with something like Walter's choices, if you will. You can't help but feel conflicted. You want to hate him and you want to love him all the same. And so I understand that contradiction in her. I don't know if it comes off all that well, and I guess it just creates a kind of incongruence that stands out to me. And then going more into season 4, she does things. She starts initiating her own things that affect her, and this is all tied in with family. I mean, for instance, one of the big things that she does is she helps her former employer, who was also her lover in season 3, because she was going like this to Walter, and she wanted to really drive him away. And what better way to drive him away than by practicing a little infidelity? But she helps Ted out because, well, actually she does it for a very direct reason. Is because of the fact she worked as a bookkeeper, and because the IRS is interested in getting back taxes from this business. If they take him down, she would also be implicated as an accessory to the crime. And then this also, okay, what else have you been doing? So basically, she wants to deflect the IRS away from her, and the way that she needs to do that is to make sure that they don't focus on Ted. And so she goes out of her way to try to get Ted to pay the fine, and the way she does this is she takes all the money that she launders and she pays off Ted. And of course, Ted doesn't quite see the obviousness of it, and then he has to be persuaded. And this is, of course, where she herself calls Saul. Yeah, that's another character that I forgot to really mention all that much, which is interesting because yes, the spin-off show is going to get the go-ahead, and in fact, it even automatically renewed for a second season. So talking about levels, and actually, Better Call Saul is what this is supposed to be. It's supposed to be the prequel, and it's all focused on Saul Goodman and kind of how he became, how he got to where he was. So you kind of see his evolution, and I think that may be interesting. Hopefully they'll have it be as tight and well mechanized as its parent show, but only time will tell. But anyways, so she starts taking measures to get that to happen, and so that makes her a very, that kind of makes her. I originally sort of compared her to Lady Macbeth at that moment, but that isn't quite right. So I go by the Connie Corleone comparison, a la Part 3. Just trying to combine that with Kay Adams. It just doesn't. It's just two very, very different things that. Now they could work, and again, I see this making sense because of Skylar's situation, but I don't know if it quite works for me. But having said all that, it doesn't make it any less of a great show. In fact, the fact that I'm thinking about her and sort of how she operates, I think to me makes it a very human character. Because let's face it, if you look at ourselves, there's a lot of inconsistencies in our lives. In fact, there's even an Onion article making fun of that, where a man is irritated by his own discontinuity, where he looks at his life, and if you look at the series of decisions he's made, none of them add up to anything logical or coherent. But we human beings are not logical and incoherent. We do things for all kinds of reasons, both good, bad, indifferent, and odd. So of course there's going to be inconsistencies and incongruencies and contradictions in the way we do things, and I think that makes it, that to me is what makes a character human. And then furthermore, is it still believable? Is there something compelling? And even if you don't particularly like a character, is there still something do they still engage you? And I do think that Skylar does engage. It's just, again, that would be my, if I were to nitpick and say there's one thing I don't particularly care for, it would probably be that. But everything else is really, really good. And now I'm really curious, because now I'm near the home stretch, and I know that for the next 2 seasons, arguably 1 season split in half, up for debate. But because I'm in the home stretch, because I'm nearing the end of the show, I'm really, really curious to see how they wrap everything up and what happens next. So. That's going to be my reward for this weekend, after dealing with long days of work and dealing with all kinds of various nonsense whatevers. So this is how I get to have fun. So yeah, I thought I was going to have something more, but I guess that's it. So that was season 4. And I'm going to continue on. And until next time, take care.